Welcome back to Harbour Unboxed. I have finally got Tim back. We haven't been united since Computex.
That's right.
Taiwan was the last time we actually got together and did a Q&A series. So we're back at it now. We should be doing this monthly again. But we're kicking off the July series with, well, part 1, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And there'll probably be a part 2, but probably not a part 3. Anyway, before we get into it, today's sponsor spot is brought to you by Thermal Grizzly and their WireView Pro 2, the best way to safeguard your 12-volt high-powered connector from melting. This little device plugs in between your graphics card's power connector and the power supply's cable to measure current, voltage, temperatures, and the power of each individual pin. It has a built-in display with configurable views for per-pin current, total power, and temperature, plus audible and visual alarms if thresholds are exceeded. The CNC machined aluminium body includes a semi-passive fan for cooling, automatic data logging, and optional automatic system shutdown via the included splitter cable for extra safety. Thermal Grizzly are so confident that the WireView Pro 2 will keep your graphics card safe that they're backing the product with an extended warranty covering the GPU connector for 2 years. That is a crazy level of support, so for more information, please check the link in the video description.
There are rumors of the 50 Super Series being resurrected. There's also a rumor of a heavily cut down 5090 on the way to sit between the 5090 and 5080. Have you guys heard anything that would back up these rumors, or is the internet huffing copium?
Well, we did discuss the resurrection of the Super Series in the last Q&A series in Taiwan.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't really have any concrete information. We were more just discussing the fact that the rumors had resurfaced, that, they were apparently back up and we're expecting them in perhaps the coming months. I've heard nothing about that since, and a cut down 5090 sort of to position, or some sort of product to position between the 58 and the 5090, because there's obviously a huge gap there. Haven't heard anything about that either. Don't know how much sense that would make. Maybe if it was part of like the Super Series refresh, that could make sense. But again, we haven't really heard anything. But I have heard, well, there are some rumors at the moment. So one of them came from BenchLife. So they reported that NVIDIA is rumored to be planning an increased price. So price increase for both the GDR6 and GDR7 memory kits for the RTX GPUs. So at this point, the rumor is they've informed the AIB partners, so the add-in board partners, so Asus, MSI, Gigabyte, and so on, that their GPUs will be getting more expensive. So RAM crisis is the reason for this. Now, I've reached out to a few of our contacts to see, if this information's correct, and I've heard that they're jacking prices up significantly. So take this with a grain of salt, but I've heard from retailers they've seen, upcoming price lists and the prices are monstrous. So we're talking about 40% increases. So 5070 Ti, for example, is currently 1,500 Australian dollars at sort of the cheaper end. That'll be going up to like $2,100 if these updated price lists are to be correct. Already, if they want to buy stock now, it's like 13% more expensive. So that's an extra $200 on what you'd be seeing right now for 5070 Ti's. So again, these prices you're not going to see right now as you're watching this Q&A, but once the existing stock sells out and they're forced to buy a new product, that is the prices that they're talking about. Whether or not they do go up by 40%, I don't know. They couldn't really confirm. They're just saying, well, look, these are the price lists we're looking at now to show what the pricing will be in the coming weeks. But whether or not that's completely locked in, I don't know. It's a bit of a weird situation. But they said if they were to purchase right now, it is 13% more expensive. And it does vary depending on how much, VRAM the model has. So we're talking about the 16 gigabyte models here that will be going up by these percentages.
Mm-hmm.
But so as far as rumors goes, that's pretty much one of the things we were able to look into and get information on. So not great news if you are hoping to buy a GeForce GPU. I haven't heard about 9070s, 9070 XTs. I would normally say if you want a GPU, rush out and get it now. Though I'm not sure I would advise anyone to spend what's the equivalent of about $1,000 US on a 5070 Ti. I think at that point I'd just be giving up and waiting, doing something else. That's an absurd amount of money to pay at this point of the product cycle. Because, what are they? We're going on 2 years now for some of these products.
Is that why they were maybe thinking of bringing back the Super Series? Is like, well, if memory's going to be really expensive, maybe we need to incentivize people to not buy the same old product for like a huge amount of money. Can we incentivize people through a slightly newer product?
It is, but I know what you're saying. It is the same old product, but crucially with more VRAM, so that is good.
Yeah, I mean, that's just going to increase the cost of the product. But I was thinking more just along the lines of it's new. It doesn't matter whether it's actually new or not, but, it's a refreshed product. They're trying to generate some interest in it. But then I think we'd heard some, back at Computex, when we were filming that Q&A, it was almost like a hot topic, that rumor had sort of just come out that potentially they were going to bring back the Super Series. But I think since then, it seems like the rumors have sort of cooled on that, and the same sort of people that were reporting they were going to bring it back are now reporting that actually maybe that isn't going to be happening, which it makes it really hard to say, right? Because clearly these decisions are being made based on the price of the memory that they're able to source it from. And when the key selling point of the Super Series is more memory, it's just going to live and die based on the price of the memory.
No sense at all.
So, if it was some sort of different GPU die configuration, then, maybe you would see some changes there. And maybe that is something that NVIDIA should be exploring instead of creating these, newer memory configurations is, can they make a faster 12 gigabyte card instead of the 5070? It's like, a Super Series, same 12 gigabytes. Can they rework something there, considering the GPU die is going to become less of, in terms of the BOM cost of the product, right? It's going to be less relevant than the cost of the memory. Mm-hmm. But I don't think we'll see a Super Series, to be honest. The interest that people are seeing in current GPUs in that sort of price tier, the 16 gig cards are very expensive. Even the 5060 Ti 16 gigabyte model is like nearly $600 now. It's, the interest in that product has got to be pretty low. So I just can't see them coming out and being like, spend even more money on this card that's got 6 gigabyte more VRAM or whatever, because that's going to add hundreds of dollars to the asking price just from the memory.
Yep.
So, I don't see that happening. And then the product between the 5080 and the 5090, I mean, if they're still able to sell 5090s for what is, like $4,000 US, whatever they cost now, I don't really see why they would cut down that silicon and sell it to you for less. If the current models they've got are flying off shelves and there isn't a lot of leftover silicon that they can't already put into the RTX Pro series cards, which use like the cut down versions, I don't see them producing a gaming card in that slot. And again, they can't make the 5080 any better. That is using the full die that model is using effectively. So I just can't see them coming out and being like, here's a, I don't know, $1,500 US or $2,000 US intermediary product, when the 4090s, they seem to be still flying off shelves as far as I can see. They're highly in demand.
Because they're good for AI workloads.
Yeah.
So NVIDIA's basically created an environment where they don't need to sell to gamers, and therefore they're not selling to gamers.
Yeah.
It's pretty much that simple.
Yeah.
All right, bit of an interesting question here, Tim. What games and performance do you think Valve were targeting when they were settling on sub RX 7600 performance for the Steam machine?
Well, I mean, they've claimed in sort of their public statements that, this model is designed to be as fast or faster than the majority of people's current Steam hardware based on the Steam hardware survey.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess they've sort of positioned it, that's their public messaging. As for what games they're sort of trying to target, I guess they're going again for sort of what are the mainstream people playing. If you look at the Steam hardware survey, the median or average sort of rig is not going to be able to play the latest AAA titles on ultra settings, probably more your sort of popular multiplayer games, indie titles, that sort of thing. I don't really think, though, that they were targeting a certain level of performance or games, in my opinion. I think the product is much more likely to be based on what hardware they could actually access.
Mm-hmm.
So the available hardware that in the price point that they were sort of targeting is this sort of sub RX 7600 X laptop or maybe recycled laptop GPU.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have the volumes, I wouldn't say, to go to AMD and be like, create a really highly affordable custom APU for us, like you'd see Sony or Microsoft doing with their consoles. They don't have that option because I don't think they'd be expecting the Steam machine to sell like 50 million units, right? So they go to AMD, they're like, what can you do for us? What's your menu? AMD gives them back the menu and they're like, well, I guess our option is
the scrap machine.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
Yeah.
Because if the parts they had available for the prices they paid were 50% faster, but required, more cooling, more power delivery, and an overall bigger design, the Steam machine would have been an overall bigger design. They didn't want to make this tiny little cute compact gaming PC necessarily. They just wanted to make the best sort of gaming system they could offer at that price point. So if it happened to be a more powerful system that needed it to be 50% larger, then that's ultimately what it would have been, because there'd be no sense making this tiny little thing that's much weaker for the same or similar money. So they've really just tried to come up with the most appealing product they can with the limited range of options they had, and that's the Steam Machine. But yeah, they didn't say, okay, well, it has to be this size and sort of this power profile. So what can we get that does that? And it turns out it's, you know, a crappy laptop RX 7600, which wasn't even a good desktop GPU.
Yeah, I mean, and we have to remember as well that they were designing the Steam Machine in a very different ecosystem to what we've got now in terms of like memory prices and stuff like that. Obviously today it would make a lot more sense to beef up the components that aren't currently undergoing this huge price inflation. So things like the CPU and GPU, you know, yes, the VRAM side of the GPU is much more expensive, but the actual core is going to become a smaller percentage of the overall BOM cost when memory is so high. So it theoretically would have made a lot more sense to go, well, you know, maybe there was a GPU option that was 10% more expensive. Today, that would make a lot of sense because the ultimate, you know, end of the day price that the Steam Machine would go up would be much more limited than it would have been back in when they were sort of designing it for different memory.
Yeah, I think you still end up with similar problems though, because if you do go with a more powerful GPU and a more powerful CPU, it absolutely would need to be bigger than it is, or louder, because it already runs excessively hot. And then you start getting, it becomes less of like this custom like laptop desktop hybrid and just more of a desktop. And then it's competing more directly with, you know, off the shelf desktops.
I guess so. I mean, it is much smaller than a PS5, for example. So obviously there is a tolerance for people buying some sort of like console.
Oh, I'm not saying it would be too big.
Yeah.
I'm just saying one of the key advantages that people point to is no longer a thing, right?
Right, but I think they only point to that being an advantage because the performance sucks. If this was like a highly performant product at the price, people would mention the sort of size thing as less of a pro. It would still be a compact system, but I think people would be pointing more to, well, this is a great value for money system for gaming. But I think when they were designing the product, they were thinking that this would be maybe not a amazing value entry-level system, but certainly somewhat competitive. Now, I'm still not convinced that it would have been, but I think people would have had more tolerance for a product that was, say, $700 or whatever it was potentially going to be than over $1,000 that it ended up being. So, yeah, I think that's more the thinking that they were going with. They didn't want it to be a super expensive product. They were sort of going, hey, what can we get for this sort of amount of money? The option was the RX 7600. And so that's what they've sort of ended up being. And hey, maybe not choosing a 16 gig GPU has ended up making it actually slightly more affordable for them, considering they don't need to make it a 16 gig card, even though it, of course, would have been a lot better, but it obviously would have made it more expensive now.
Yeah, a lot more expensive.
Yeah.
Would you, memory crisis aside, would you have gone with that particular hardware configuration if you were trying to offer like a gaming type system? Would you have gone with a laptop 7600 type GPU with a release date target of 2026?
If I was personally, if I was making a product and I wanted to make it the best hardware, yeah.
Well, just not the best hardware, not even the best price, just the best package, like the best experience for people, like something that,
yeah,
you know, you would buy it, be proud of using it, the performance would be enjoyable, just like, you know, the best all-round experience.
I mean, no, right? Like, no, I don't think I would. Maybe that's because I know as a sort of hardware reviewer of sorts that it is older hardware. So I can see from what products are available that there is, you know, a similar sort of die size, similar sort of theoretical cost for better products. So for me personally, yeah, no, I would not be trying to target that configuration. I think it is too slow for a lot of the games, you know, AAA titles. And I've sort of always thought of it as a console competitor. And so if your PS5 can run the latest AAA games at acceptable levels of quality and frame rate, and the Steam Machine being sort of not quite at that level, you know, it makes it's not a sort of configuration that I'd be wanting to make. I think they were really screwed over though, because the options that I'm sort of suggesting weren't there for them to take. Like there wasn't this, AMD wasn't trying to like, here's all of our 9060 XTs that we're trying to get rid of, and so put those in your Steam machine and sell it for a low price. It seems like AMD is doing just a perfectly fine job of selling that silicon, so there's no incentive to offer it to a company like Valve. So the fact that they were able to get the 7600, I think, is just because it is old. It is this sort of outdated product. They made a laptop version that wasn't that popular, so it was an option that they could use. But certainly if I was coming up with like a great experience configuration, it's not something I'd be picking. How are you feeling about the seeming commitment to de-shitifying Windows that Microsoft is on? Could it be in a few years, Windows will no longer be the most complained about operating system in the world?
I don't think that's possible. But certainly if they improve it and make it better in ways that they're claiming to, then that would be a good thing, because a lot of people still use Windows. The thing with Windows is, generally speaking, like the performance of Windows and where it's at right now is, in my opinion, quite good. And I have seen a lot of Windows 11 25H2 versus SteamOS and various other Linux distributions, and Windows stacks up really well. Like, generally speaking, especially for the later hardware, Windows 11 is faster than SteamOS. It's about 10% faster on average based on what I've seen. And I've seen a few different sources pointing to the same data. I haven't seen anyone claiming otherwise. So I think it's pretty safe to assume that that's accurate. I haven't tested it myself just yet. But Windows 11, in terms of performance, is stacking up well. Obviously, the big concerns are like, the bloat, which people are often concerned about the performance side of things. I think that's proven to be less of an issue. It's more the spying and telemetry and all that sort of stuff that goes on there.
Yeah, and the user experience of like, how easy it is to perform a certain task. Do you have to go through loops? Do you get pop-ups?
I didn't want to start you on that because we sort of want to answer this within 20 minutes.
But yeah, I mean, I think what we're seeing in terms of like the sort of de-shitifying sort of angle is that Microsoft is actually now facing some sort of competition on the OS front. This isn't out of the goodness of their hearts. Like, they're not listening to user complaints and being like, wow, we should really get off our asses and actually start fixing Windows. It's because they're facing increased competition from SteamOS. You mentioned on the gaming side, Valve is clearly going down a path of making SteamOS more accessible. You can now run it on your own system if you want to. It's not just locked to their hardware. And then on sort of, not that we normally cover this, but they are facing increased competition from Apple with macOS in the laptop form factors. As soon as, Apple was designing their own silicon, they're sort of making their own ecosystem, they've continued to sort of offer these sleek, user-friendly experiences for people that buy their own hardware. And Microsoft has found it difficult to compete with that in terms of like high-end premium sort of laptops. Obviously, those products do exist and they're still popular, but macOS used to be kind of a joke. Like, no one was really using it. It was like the market share numbers were like Linux level, like very, very low. And over time, people are getting more and more interested in using it. And so if you're sitting inside Microsoft and you're sort of looking at these trends, like one key thing people use Windows for is gaming, that's currently being targeted by Valve. Another key thing is sort of these premium, it's not just laptops. Apple offer desktop solutions as well. Clearly, those are becoming more popular. You can't just continue to grind people down with these like money-making, designed by committee garbage features where you're not thinking about the user experience anymore, because eventually you just inshitify it to the level where people look for alternatives. And gamers are clearly doing this. How many comments did you see on your Steam machine alternative build saying, well, you didn't use SteamOS? What, can you use SteamOS? I'm really interested in using SteamOS. We would never have gotten those comments 2 years ago. 2 or 3 years ago, it would have been like, Linux, year of the Linux, ha ha ha, make fun of those people again. The landscape is so different now.
Yep. Do you think RTX 6090s, I hate to even think how much they're going to cost, do you think they'll burn as often as 5090s or more often? Well, the 3090 Ti was, I would say, less reliable than the 2080 Ti. And then the 4090 became a lot less reliable than the 3090 Ti. And then I'd say the 5090, I don't really have evidence to back this up, so this is a feelings-based comment, but my feelings are that the 5090 has been less reliable again than the 4090. We have talked about the high-powered connector and how even more safeguards were removed, and DeBow has done amazing videos demonstrating how easily you can run into like a load imbalance that'll melt the connector and potentially the cables. So based on that heading, are they going to pull up, or are we heading for an even worse product in the 6090? And we also had the hotspot temperature removed for the 5090 that's sort of being added back now. We're in the process of sorting that out. And that's uncovering other issues potentially with 5090s where, you know, cards were throttling or, you know, running into stability issues. And so a few different issues there. 6090, yeah, I actually hate to think what we could be in for there in terms of pricing and just, I don't even know what.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like NVIDIA is sticking by the 12-watt high-power connector.
They're not only sticking by it, though. Every iteration, they somehow make it worse.
Yeah, I mean, if I was in NVIDIA's shoes, I'd be wanting to improve that situation, trying to, you know, put in more safeguards or use more connectors. But I think they're very much on the path of we want this single connector on our, at the very least, on the Founders Edition cards. And then, obviously, a lot of AIBs use the single connector as well. It seems there's no real... You haven't seen NVIDIA do too much to sort of do a revision or whatever to make it better or safer for users. So considering that the connector sucks and they're still going to continue using it.
It can suck a lot less, though.
It can, like, yeah, it could if they put in some safeguards and stuff. But again, my sort of thinking is if they were going to introduce some safeguards, you'd probably want to do a revision somewhere through the current cycle to sort of go, well, we sort of understand these problems, so let's maybe encourage AIBs to do it a different way.
It's just a silly situation, in my opinion, because ignoring everyone else's, or anyone else's, I should say, experience, and just honing your own personal experience having used this connector with a few different systems, right?
Yeah.
Again, ignore everything else. You only have gone from, like, you know, twin, triple, 8-pin connectors to this connector. What would your opinion be of it?
I mean, it's. I don't have too much of an opinion. It's fine. Like,
but,
I'm like,
so again, I've got them everywhere. I've even tried to have failures on them.
Yeah, same.
So, providing they work as intended, so they balance the current over all of the wires correctly, it's an quick and easy to install. I when I'm testing, doing my 50 game GPU test, I love the cards that have that connector, because just bam in and I get away. Whereas I've got to, like, work out my, you know, 6 to 8 pin connectors and
I was sort of thinking
this isn't a usual user thing. So I'm not defending this thing. So before anyone loses, all I'm saying is in my little bubble, right? It's quick and easy to connect. It's clean and tidy, and it works flawlessly for me and for you, right?
Yeah.
So it is a good user experience in that sense. But some of them melt, destroying things, and I could have that problem in the next 10 minutes. So could you?
Yeah, we could build a new system and it doesn't work properly.
What I'm trying to get at here is if you eliminate this potential issue, and it's not just a potential issue because it's been widely reported, and it is possible to eliminate that pretty much entirely. So if you solve that problem, you can still have the connector that Buildzoid would call dumb because it doesn't have this built-in headroom that the previous connectors had. But if you solve it from melting, then that sort of becomes a bit of a moot point. It's like, well, nobody's, you know, people are having alarms go off or whatever, and then having to reset the connector or ensure that everything's connected properly, which not ideal, but at least they're not having melted connectors. I feel like it would be a lot better, right? So if they had have recognized the problem with the 4090 and instead of removing more of the safeguards, done like a thermal Grizzly, you know, and added safeguards, then we wouldn't really be talking about this anymore. It'd be like, yeah, some people have the odd issue where they have to, like, shut down and reset the connector or whatever. I don't know. All I'm getting at is you've never had a problem. I've never had a problem. The vast majority of people who use this connector haven't had a problem. If they just safeguarded it for the few people that have had the problem, it would become a non-issue. And it's just a quick and easy, nice little connector rather than having to, you know, put in 3.
Yeah, I guess from my perspective, like, yeah, it is easier, but yeah, if they made a version of it that was like 50% larger,
that would be even better.
It's like I don't care what the connector is. Like, I don't, like, yes, from a testing perspective, if I have to change out the card a lot, it is easier to use. But if I'm someone that builds a system, like, let's say my gaming rig, right, which
Yeah, I think we're on the same page. Like, I agree, they could make it better with the headroom so that even if it didn't have the safety features, you're still not going to melt cables.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking, like, as a normal user, I'm not really tinkering around in my system too much. I put the GPU and I leave it most of the time. Having to spend an extra 30 seconds plugging in multiple cables, or it's a slightly larger cable or whatever, is like such a small inconvenience that it still is surprising to me that, like, the single cable solution is nice, but like it's not something I was like, wow, I wish I didn't have to plug in 3 cables. It's like, it is what it is. It wasn't a huge concern. I was much more, to me at least, it's much more concerning how large, how many slots they're taking up and stuff like that. You know, that is more annoying than having to plug in the cable. But anyway,
that's just how they're making them faster.
Regardless of all of that, right? Yes, if they improve the connector, it may stop melting. I guess the other thing with the 6090 is we don't really know what its power consumption is going to be. Is it going to be the same?
Watts.
Well, I would think, so from the 4090 to the 5090, right, they use largely the same family of TSMC nodes. It wasn't really a generational change. That's why we didn't see a lot of efficiency improvements with this generation. The 5090 is just more power hungry than the 4090, and that's why you see a lot of the performance gains. I think the next generation
should rein it in a bit.
Yeah, I don't know whether they'll rein in the power, but because it'll be a new node, there is going to be
more performance at that power.
Yeah, there's going to be some things they could do to, you know, whether or not it's more power, you know, or more performance at the same power, or they take the power back and they can manage it some ways. I'm not sure, but it's not going to be a situation where, you know, they've tested this connector on a card and it wasn't great, but then they both removed the safeguards and made the GPU more
maybe to stop one of the lines getting imbalanced. It'll go from a 6 cable to a 5.
Oh, no. Don't give them ideas.
That'll fix it.
Yeah, this is a good question. Might be useful for some people given current situations. With storage costs being so high and no sign of them going cheap anytime soon, do you have any recommendations to make my current SSD last as long as possible? Yeah, very important given that, yeah, if you have to do a warranty claim, they may just refund you and then you'll have to spend more money on your SSD. So you'll actually lose if your hardware dies. So you probably want to keep it running, right? So You've got a few tips here.
Yeah, I made a few notes. So one of the simple ones is avoid write amplification. So don't fill the whole drive up. You'll get a warning message if you do that. But when you fill it right up, it does excessive writing, trying to find empty blocks to write new data. So minimum of 10%, I would say, of whatever the overall capacity is, leave free. Ideally, try and free up about 20% of it, because it actually improves performance, but can also improve the longevity of the drive. Obvious one, don't let them run super hot. There's obviously a temperature that, well, there is a temperature that SSDs like to run at. I would try and keep it around 40 degrees if possible. 50 sort of would be the comfortable peak that I would keep it at. 50 is probably starting to get a bit hot where you can start to degrade the drive. And I think for most drives, 70 degrees would be the threshold, whereas if you reach that, then you start thermally throttling the drive. It'll slow down its actual performance to avoid degrading more aggressively.
Yeah, so I guess a good thing there is, like, look at your motherboard layout with where your M.2 slots are. A lot of the designs have the M.2 under the graphics card.
Yep.
And while that may be the primary PCI 5.0, you have to look at your layout to see which slot gets the, you know, is it connected to the chipset or the CPU?
Yep.
But some do have a primary or a slot connected to the CPU that's not directly under the graphics card, which may be a preferable location.
Some of them can transfer the heat through the PCB and out the back. It depends on how the board is configured, you know, what it's offering there in terms of M.2 cooling. But all of the M.2s have, or the SSDs have, a thermal sensor, which you can read in like hardware info or whatever. So it's pretty easy to keep an eye on that. You can even have like an overlay while you're gaming and stuff. So I'd be aiming to keep temperatures under 50 degrees on that. But around 50 should be fine. Let the OS manage optimization. So don't like defrag. That's a
hard drive thing.
That's a legacy thing from the hard drive days. So you got trim that takes care of SSDs. So just leave that. Do not defrag. It's pretty much the advice there. Use sleep mode rather than hibernation. Every time you hibernate, it actually writes everything out of memory to the drive to then recall it later when you come out of hibernation. So if you're doing that multiple times a day, that's just a huge amount of extra written data, and you really want to avoid writing data to an SSD as much as you can, because that's kind of what, well, it is exactly what their endurance is measured in, is how many writes they can do, terabytes of data written. So sleep instead of hibernation, and then just a little simple tip, kind of like your motherboards, just keep the firmware up to date, because they occasionally release firmware updates that improve stuff like longevity, garbage collection, all that sort of stuff, which can improve the life of the SSD. So they're probably some pretty basic tips. I don't think too much more you can do outside of that. But yeah, they're the things I'd be doing to ensure that your SSD doesn't die. Thankfully, SSDs these days are quite reliable.
Yep, I agree.
I found the main thing whenever I've run into a problem has been heat related. So just keep the thermals in check and you should be fine.
With AMD releasing a new X3D CPU every other week, it seems, is it possible that the 3D V-cache tech will become standard across all of AMD CPUs in the future?
I don't think so. I think they like to create this segmentation where they have your lower end 7500F sort of dirt cheap type CPUs, and then the APUs, and then your more standard CPUs, and then the X3D CPUs. There is such a range of X3D CPUs at various price points now anyway. It depends on what architecture and core count and all that sort of stuff. But I don't think it'd be just a standard feature. So there might be larger caches as standard, but I think there'll always be like a premium larger cache version, which they'd be able to brand as X3D or 3D V cache, and just because it has been so successful for them, and it just gives that flexibility within the product lineup.
Yeah, I mean, it is obviously always going to be, at least in the way that they're currently doing it with the stacking of dies, it is a more costly process. So even if they can sort of optimize how costly it is an added process. It's always going to be more expensive than not including that process in the manufacturing.
Even if it wasn't, it's still silicon, right?
Yes, it's still silicon. It's adding more to the package. Therefore, it's going to increase the cost. And if you look across their lineup, for gamers, the other products may not make a lot of sense. You may see this X3D sort of taking up all of the product stack, and you go, well, why would I buy one of the other parts? But you have to remember that AMD doesn't just make their lineup for gamers. And so there's no real benefit for someone with like an office workload or a lot of productivity workloads to have the X3D component. So it's effectively for those users just adding cost for no real benefit. So it'd make a lot more sense for a non-gaming workload to have a cheaper non-X3D part that they could offer with more cores or the core count that's required for that workload. And so that's why I don't think you'll see all products have X3D, because if you're selling an office PC, you don't need it. They can offer it at a lower cost, or maybe the same cost, but they can internally save a bit of money or make more of a margin off it, or whatever the case is. And that's just a better way of having the ecosystem. And that's pretty much exactly what you see right now. There are parts in the current lineup with that X3D that a gamer wouldn't really purchase. Like I'm thinking of like a 9900X. That's not really a gaming part, but still does make sense for some people, and that's why they continue to offer it.
All right, that is going to do it for part 1 of the July Q&A. We did a good job of not letting Tim just unload on Microsoft and what he really thinks about Windows 11.
Well, we did a podcast about that a while back, so my thoughts on there are well documented.
As much as
fun listening to that one.
Yes, as much as many of you would have enjoyed that. If you do want to hear Tim ranting for about an hour about how bad Windows 11 is, I think we did 2, didn't we?
I can't remember. Grinds my gears.
Yeah, well, me too. I'm not, not here to defend Microsoft. I was just pointing out a few things, but I think we did well to avoid that. But if you, as I said, go watch the Unboxed podcast if you want to hear that. But that's pretty much going to do it for this episode. We do have many more of your questions, which we will get answers for in the coming episodes. So keep a lookout for that, I guess, right? You'll go to
check out Patreon if you want to sign up. We've got YouTube memberships as well, Discord chat, monthly live streams, some BTS stuff. Yeah, there's some cool stuff in there if you're interested. Outside of that, I'm your host, Tim.
I'm your host, Steve.
See you in the next one.